All his thoughts have nothing to do with females. They all have to do with males. So now he's struggling because this is a person who is a believer. I could tell that this person has not acted on the impulses. Your faith is literally regulating everything that's going on in your mind. So your faith is not going to allow you to do this. What we see is when the brain heals, the brain starts firing the way it's supposed to fire. Now, it sounds very simplistic to say that, but at least this has been my experience with the people that I've treated with this. Science now knows that the brain holds the key to a lot of problems that people have. The first thing that happened to me about 1989 was realizing that when people in a psych facility are not able to verbalize how they feel, what they think, what they want to say, they switch to symbolic language such as drawings, doodling, maybe using pictures, sometimes using sound, sometimes using gestures. And I realized that those were ways that people were communicating. And I started seeing that some of my patients actually, if they were not able to talk to me, if I asked them what's the matter, they wouldn't tell me. They would just say, I don't know. They may start crying, but immediately they start drawing some things. And I realized that the drawings they were having, they were using certain colors that were not by mistake. That's when I started putting some things together to say, I have got to know what these colors represent when people are using them. Child abuse kids, many times they would draw people in sexual positions or draw something that happened to them. And a good trained sexual abuse therapist would know exactly what's going on by looking at the drawings. And I just took it a step further and say sometimes instead of drawing a picture of sexual abuse, they may have a color that means I was sexually abused. They may use a color that means I was physically abused. They may use a color that means I feel horrible. They may use a color that means I want to kill myself. Use a color that says I was tortured. I realized very early on that a lot of my trauma patients, they lived in their emotional brain in their right hemisphere. And if we were to help them, we have to go there where they live to understand what they are dealing with. The only problem I saw was most of our therapies, our talk therapies, they're all cognitive. They are just reaching the wrong side, the side that doesn't need us. The side that needs us is this side. So I learned that we have to develop the same language with that side, which is the emotional language, which is the language of nonverbals, gestures, colors. What's happening in this person's brain is that in their face, which also wraps around at the top of their brain, is a color that is actually telling me that this person is trying to protect themselves, to cover themselves, to have a facade that they wear in their face. And that facade actually in this person is saying, I am really, really struggling. I'm having a lot of problems. I'm having a lot of confusion. In fact, I'm experiencing so much negativity that I feel like something has taken me over. This person is what we say in Christian circles is having a tremendous spiritual battle. He is fighting spiritual forces that are driving him to do some things in his life that he would otherwise not do. This seems to be the place in the brain where every memory fragment that is not processed into a story is kept there. This is how I know what is the biggest problem somebody has. The second chart is a totally different scenario with this person. This gentleman comes in and I look at his brain and I realize that this is someone who has a very strong presentation in their higher region of their brain. The difference between this person and the person in chart 1 is that you don't see any pinks anywhere. So there is absence of a lot of emotions. So you see a strong presentation here in their frontal cortex, you see a strong presentation here in their perception. However, the family trauma that we saw in the first person, we see that this person has it. And as a result, their perception of themselves is totally run by what their family thought of them. So they don't have a self-esteem. Their self-esteem based on what mom and dad thought of them, or even siblings as well. What seems to be a problem with that is that that person is carrying a lot of shame. Because most families, whether we like it or not, most families think that by shaming their kids, they are motivating them to do good things, when it just really does the opposite of it, which is something that I've seen in my years of working with people. As a result, what we see in this brain is a tremendous struggle with thoughts that come from sexual abuse. How do I say that? Because of what's in their corpus callosum, also what's in their cerebellum. In their cerebellum, like I said before, this is the part of the brain that contains internal threats. In other words, what's here to this person is very threatening to them. So we know that these are all the thoughts and feelings and memories of the sexual trauma. So when the sexual trauma in this brain, it's not sexual pleasure, it's not fun things at all. Because of this color, it means it's horrible feelings that produce more shame, feeling dirty, feeling like, I shouldn't be doing this, that sort of thing. Well, this is a guy who's married with a family and kids. But because of this, I know that he is not actually functioning sexually with his wife the way he should. Why? Because when there's no red, there's just this color here, that means it's not a good thing for him. So as I'm saying this to him, I can see the tears because he's really beginning to feel very bad. And I'm saying to them, well, one of the reasons why you're feeling bad because you're feeling a lot more shame. And I don't mean to make you feel shame. I'm just telling you what your brain is telling you, which is telling me, for the purpose of you being able to heal that. This is not just a way of saying, wow, I cannot believe this guy can tell these things. It's a way that your brain is telling you to help you. And then I say to him, one of the issues that's happening in your brain is that the alarm part of your brain is concerned about sexual things. That's what the most upsetting thing for you, which actually validates what his cerebellum is doing, which also validates what we see here in his corpus callosum. And but his mind, his hippocampus, is brown. No, that strong mind that's there is all about, I cannot feel emotional pain. I cannot think emotional pain. Well, what ends up happening though is all his feelings and his thoughts, why they are locked up there, all his thoughts have nothing to do with females. They all have to do with males. So now he's struggling because this is a person who is a believer. We can see that in here with all his faith. Or he's conflicted tremendously. So he has shame because he's saying, Christians should not feel this way. And he blames himself for it. And as a result, his testosterone levels here are being monitored by a color that says we have to keep it down. We have to keep it down. Why? Because if it's up, we are afraid you might act on it. As a result, you can see that his olfactory bulb, which is the way information from the outside is picked up and reported to the inside, his faith is blocking that, which is a good thing. And by seeing this, I could tell that this person has not acted on the impulses, simply because of what I see in his brain. He says, you're right. And I said, well, the only problem with this is your anxiety is really going through the roof. When you look into the future, when you look at where you are going with your life, you are very worried about it. He says, you're right. I'm worried about it because I don't know if my wife will ever find out what I think, or would she leave? And would I end up someday really, crossing the line? I don't know what I'm doing. And I said, well, here's the thing. Because of your faith being at your regulatory part of the brain, the hypothalamus, your faith is literally regulating everything that's going in your mind. So your faith is not going to allow you to do this. And I also say to him, and I said, that's why people who have called you're an addict, they don't understand. And I said, you are not an addict. If you were an addict, this place would show that. What this place shows that you're struggling, and actually in terms of obsessive kinds of behaviors, you are winning the battle. But what you're not winning is your thoughts. And with this person, and I said, we have got to heal the family trauma. And I said, when I see family trauma like this, and I see Brown there, and I see this, my suspicion is it's your family, one of your people and your family members who may have been responsible for the sexual trauma. And he was nodding and says, yeah. And I said, that's one of the reasons why this is producing so much shame. Every time you're around that person, if they're still alive, you feel shame. He says, yeah, I have to face them at every family reunion, which causes a lot of problems for that particular person. With this person here, there is no pink, there is no femininity of any kind. What's happening in this brain is the result of the sexual trauma is making him feel like those thoughts are the only thoughts that would connect him to male relationships. But they bother him because he knows this is not okay. So this is a type of person who knows that they are not homosexual, but they get confused by the thoughts. And this is where, for clinicians, we have to be clear with people that just because you think this way, it doesn't mean that's who you are. Okay? If I think of beating somebody up, it doesn't mean that I'm a fighter. I am thinking that. So that was very affirming to this gentleman when I say that. He says, that was my biggest fear, that I may end up being homosexual. And I said, no. Chart 3 is a person who, from what we see, is a little similar to chart 1 in the sense that we see quite a bit of pinks in this brain. In fact, this one has more pinks than the other one, except their mind is not pink. Which one? The chart 1 was pink. Now, what's happening with this person is we see a tremendous amount of sexual trauma, which is not covered up. Like what we saw in the other charts, that it was revealed a little bit, and the last chart we just saw, it was pushed in the back, and some of it was really in the feeling area in the corpus callosum. But this one, in this chart, the person identifies themselves totally with sexual trauma, a sexual trauma victim. So they're just out there saying, that's who I am, which is a very big problem because we are not what happened to us. We are who we are. And experience does not make us, which is one of the big problems that this person is having. And then in addition to it, their whole, what we call the limbic system, which is the inside part of their brain, as well as their hypothalamus, which is what we call the regulator part of the brain, and their olfactory bulb, their hormone center, their pituitary gland, as well as their amygdala, it's all loaded with sexual trauma. Now, this person is in much more trouble with sexual trauma than the other two charts, in the sense that they are actually reacting to it. So this is someone who is already engaging in what we call addictive kind of a life story. This person, I don't even have to ask them if they are viewing pornography, because already they are. And their inside is full of it, because that's what's driving them. What's driving them is the need to satisfy this kind of sexual craving, which they think it's about sex, when really it's about trauma, from what we know. As a result, in their brainstem, that trauma is already leaked in there, so it's being stored in their body. So that's what's increasing their craving, that they have to have physical contact. It's not good enough for this brain to view it. They have to have the release because it's in their body. And here is another thing that complicates the picture for this brain. There's a lot of emotion in this brain. Here in the brainstem, there in the way they look at life, in their focus, their outlook, also in the way they relate, also in the way they feel. Okay. Now, this person doesn't identify themselves as female, because we can see, but here's what's happening with them. Because of so much femininity, they are being perceived by others as feminine. So when they go out, a lot of gay guys hit on them. And that's very distressing to him, because he says, I know I'm not. I don't understand this at all. And I said, okay, how do you define that? So I started suspecting that there's something he's not telling me, which is, I see the emotion, but he's not telling me that when he identifies himself as a victim of sexual trauma, is he seeing himself as a victim of sexual trauma that was done to him by a female or by a male? So when he has any thoughts at all, are they with males or females? Or he didn't want to answer that one. And immediately I knew why he didn't want to answer that one, because if he answered that one honestly, he would have to say, I struggle with being gay or something like that. And as we were talking about it, and I said, well, you are putting a label on identity, when really your identity in your brain is not saying I am gay, it's saying I'm a victim of sexual trauma. Now, all that means is that you are a person who was sexualized, or you were sexually abused. That's all it means. And now, if your thoughts, if your feelings, if the way you think is centered around males, it doesn't always mean that you are preferring males. It may mean that that's who abused you. And as someone who was abused by being beaten by a ruler, the ruler is not really the problem. The ruler is just saying this is the thing that was used to hurt you. That person can say, I'm a ruler. Well, we were able to kind of connect on that. And after that, he now started realizing that his biggest fear was all these emotions in there were making him feel like he was a female, because he would cry easily, he would identify with people who were emotional, and his best friends were females, not males. And he says, I have too many traits, like all the gay people. And I said, okay, we are seeing a theme here in these three charts. We're seeing a theme of femininity, we're seeing a theme of emotions, and we're also seeing a theme of sexual abuse. And those three themes can be very confusing for a lot of people, thinking that this is who I am, instead of this is what happened to me and this is how I feel. You know, I love to play golf, I love to run, I love to eat, but I remain the same guy who has all these different feelings. Nor do I identify myself as a golfer. Well, I'm not a golfer because I'm not a PGA guy. I'm just a guy who likes to go play there. I don't say I'm a professional eater just because I want to eat. So people confuse identity many times with what happens to them. Hopefully those three charts, what they've told us really is people go through trauma. And that trauma can alter the way the brain functions. As a result, it can alter how we perceive ourselves. It can also alter our behaviors. And when we talk about healing, we need to start thinking about healing is not just the absence of bad feelings that people have. Healing can also include our brain beginning to function the way it should function, the way it was designed to function, which produces behaviors that are congruent with not just where we are, but congruent with where we want to be, congruent with who we believe we are and how we affect the world around us. With the cross-gender people, I remember having a patient in a hospital who the first thing I saw was their brain map before I saw them. Actually, in my hospital units, it happens a lot that my staff would just bring me these brain maps. Sometimes they're just trying to see if they can, they don't mean anything by it, but they're just trying to see if they can at least catch me in one that I'm wrong. And so they showed me this, and I'm looking at this, and I said, this is very confusing because this is a guy who is doing everything he can to be a female, but his true identity is a guy, but he's trying to do the female, and here's what we found out. That is a guy who is already going through the process of sex change, was beginning to take hormones, but he had not done the surgery, And when I sat with him, and I said, here's the problem. It's trauma that happened to you that's making you decide that you are not going to be a guy, you want to be a female. Here's the problem. The problem with you going ahead with the sex change is that when your brain heals, it will be saying, I am a guy and I don't want to be female because it will be firing differently. So you regret your decision. The only thing I need to tell you is, since you are in the hospital to deal with trauma, that's what we need to deal with. We don't need to be dealing with the cross-gender thing. And I said, I am not saying you won't talk about it. In fact, a lot of people who know what I do is when I counsel people who I know they are gay, we will never have a discussion about being gay. We only have discussions about what's in your brain, what's your trauma, and healing it. And as a result, what we see is when the brain heals, the brain starts firing the way it's supposed to fire. Now, it sounds very simplistic to say that, but at least this has been my experience with the people that I've treated with this, because the brain would tell us what's going on in there. Okay. So that's about cross-gender things. Pedophilia is a whole different story. That's one thing that is still very puzzling in the scientific world, at least what I know in the literature, is that we think it has very little to do with sex. We think it has a lot to do with brain development, that these people somehow, they have not developed to be an adult who thinks like an adult. Therefore, when they see a child, they think they're peers. And so they get attracted to these children by the very same things that attract other children to other children. And because their physical body is matured, now they use this to, in their own thinking, to love a child. So in their thinking, that's what they think they're doing. Pretty much like a little kid who's playing house. Thinks it's just playing house. They don't realize that's a big thing they are doing. What people need to study in the future, those people who research, what they need to study is how can you tell if this was there before any compromising anything happened to that child? That will be the key. Why? Because right now, that's why I personally, from a scientific standpoint, I have not seen one research that convinces me of a biological basis of people being born that way. Because what I see so far is the response of the human brain to what I need to do to live in this environment.
Dr. Jerry Mungadze has for years been known as an expert in the treatment of trauma-based disorders, including SRA, DID, and PTSD. His trauma clinic is located in Bedford, Texas. We're just beginning to understand the human mind. This kind of breakthrough research gives us a fascinating glimpse into the Old Testament assertions that the heart and mind of man are one and the same. As Jeremiah 17:9 says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, search the heart and examine the mind, to reward a man according to his conduct, according to what his deeds deserve." And then there's that classic passage in the book of Romans that takes on new meaning as we explore the interior workings of the mind. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. I'm Jonathan Daugherty for Pure Pasiune.